I know what you're thinking. You must be on the wrong course. But you're not. What I'm going to show you in this section is a bit more about what you can do with Xamarin Android in the context of a normal Xamarin application in the same way that we have been using it. However, in this particular lecture, as part of this section, I want to show you what is it that you have to do in case you have this Java library over on Android Studio and you want to use it on a Xamarin application. So I'm going to show you every single step right from Android Studio where you have this Java code that you have to use over on Visual Studio for your Xamarin project, but of course this would work if you already have that AAR file, so an Android archive. So if you already have that AAR file, you're good to go. You can skip a few minutes into this lecture to just figure out how is it that you're going to be able to import that library. Let me just show you also how is it that you're going to be generating that AAR file. By the way, all of this code is of course available in the resources for this lecture in case you want to use the same library, but of course if you have your own library, these steps are going to be the same. So basically I am right here in Android Studio, I have this project, this is a library project, and inside of my Java folder I have this new library. And all I have in this library really is this contact. So this contact folder contains a contact class, and we just have some properties in here and a couple of methods along with a constructor. To be able to from this generate that AAR file, I will find the Gradle module and I will navigate over to the contacts, in my case because this is the contacts application, the contacts library, the build folder, and in here find the assemble release option. All you have to do is double click it and you will now have that AAR file generated. So let's go find it. To easily find this, what we can do is here on Android Studio, I'm going to change the view over in the project tab to project and right click on my projects folder. All I have to do is select reveal in Finder and I will be able to find this folder. Now inside of this folder, we're going to find my library, and inside of the library, the build folder. And so here in the outputs folder, there is the AAR folder. And here it is, my library. It's also in debug, but the one that I'm going to be using is the release one. You can see that this is the AAR file. So let's now already jump over to Visual Studio, back to something that we're familiar with, and check out how is it that we're going to be able to reuse this code. So I am here in Visual Studio, and the first thing that I will do is create a brand new project, but this one is actually going to not be a Xamarin Forms application yet. What I have to do is you're going to find on Visual Studio for Windows in the Android section bindings library for, of course, Android. So if we go here to Android, it's going to be quite similar. We have the Android section. In this case, we have to select library and you will find bindings library. Visual Studio for Windows is very similar. Click on next and I'm going to call this my contacts library because that is precisely what I created over on Android Studio. So let's just hit on create. And you will find that this project contains a jars folder. So it is precisely to this folder to which we want to add an existing file. So I will select add files from folder and I would go ahead and find that jar that I know already exists. Or what I can also do is simply navigate over to where that file is. I have it right here on my Finder and drag it and drop it right here. And I will select copy. So I have two versions of this, one in the source folder and one in here in my project. Now you will have to make sure that the build action for this new file is library project zip. Now here by default Visual Studio has already identified that that is the kind of file that I'm importing, so it set the build action correctly, but just make sure that it is set to library project zip. And with this we will simply be able to build this library. Now what is going to happen is that by building this library we are now going to have a DLL file. And that DLL file is pretty much what we have for any package that we have imported into a Xamarin Forms application. All those Node.js packages, those are DLL files. All those references, those are DLL files. In fact, let me go ahead and show you something. I'm actually going to be creating a brand new solution because this has already generated the DLL file. So let me just pause this for a second and show you that if I show this in the Finder, my library, I will now find inside of the bin folder, and in this case the debug folder, that DLL file, the context library.dll file. So this one is the one that we will now be able to use. Let me just close this other Finder that we are not going to be using. This one is going to be important in a second. Let me create a new solution from Visual Studio. This one is going to be again a blank forms application. So we're going to be creating again a Xamarin Forms project. This is going to be my contacts app. What I want to show you in here is that all this time, what happens is that this project that we have right here, the .NET Standard, that this is a library similar to the one that we have just created. And when we build this, of course, this library is going to generate a DLL file that is always referenced over here into the Android project and to the iOS project. So we have that project reference. That is what's happening. With the project created, what we will have to do is, of course, import this library. And this, of course, has to happen inside of the Android project. This is, after all, an Android library. So all we have to do is right-click on the references, edit references, and navigate over to .NET Assembly. All we have to do is browse for that file, which we know is inside of our contacts library, inside of the bin folder, inside of the debug folder, and here it is, the DLL. So we just click on open and click on OK. So now we can build the Android project, and this library is just going to be ready for us to start using it. So to test this out, what I will do is actually some dependency injection. All I'm going to do is on my contacts application, the library, the .NET Standard library, I am going to simply just create a new file that is going to be an interface. This is going to be my iContact interface. And what I will simply define is that this interface is going to have a couple of members. It's going to have something very similar to what the library over on Android would have. This is really not necessary. I just want to showcase how is it that we're going to be using it. But let me go ahead and define a couple of methods in here. One is going to greet the contact and one is going to say goodbye to the contact. If you didn't notice, that is very similar to what we have over here in Android Studio. We have the greet contact and the bye contact messages. One returns hello plus the name and last name of the contact, and the other one goodbye plus name and last name. So it's going to be rather similar eventually. All we have to do is call these methods. But let me go ahead and just implement this over on Android and iOS. So in fact, iOS is not going to be necessary. I'm not going to be testing it, but just keep in mind that you could implement, of course, this iContact right now, because we don't have any library that is coming from an iOS implementation. We would have to completely implement it right here in Xamarin Forms. But let me show you how is it that you would reuse something that is coming from an Android library. I am going to add a new class inside of my Android project. This is going to be the contact class, which is going to implement the iContact interface. So I will implement it. It's going to have these two members. And so these two members are the ones that are going to be calling the methods that we have in the library. From here, because we have access to that library, notice, by the way, if we open the library from the references, we're going to find these contacts, or well, all of the members from that library. In my case, I find this contact class, which is the one that I created over here. If you can see, this has the greet, the bye contact, the name, last name, email, and that is exactly what I have here. The greet, the bye contact, the methods right here, register, the constructor. So I will be able to access that class right from here. So for the bye contact, I will simply call the bye contact from that class. So in my case, I will be able to access the contacts namespace, which is coming from that library, which has this contact class. And I will simply create a new contact from this class. Now notice that this one in particular is going to require 3 strings, one for the name, the last name, and the email. So let's just pass my information. And what this will do is return from this contact that I'm creating the byContact method. And something rather similar is going to happen with the hello contact. So I will create a new contact, except in this case I am going to be calling the greet contact method. And again, these are coming directly from this other class, greet contact byContact. You can see the constructor here asking for the name, last name, and email, assigning those values to these variables. And these variables are, after all, going to be accessed from the greet and byContact methods. So these are coming from that library. So now let me just register my dependency, because after all, of course, this is coming from Andrew. We have to inject it over to the Xamarin Forms.NET Standard library. And so I will write here assembly. To use the dependency type, I use Xamarin.Forms, and the type is going to be that contact, which is actually coming from contactapp.droid. So again, I'm just simply exporting the dependency in here, and I'm missing a parenthesis here. We have seen this before. Now all we have to do is access an iContact instance from this class. So let me go ahead and do that directly from the main page .xaml.cs, and we'll do it directly from the constructor. So right here, what I will do is create an iContact instance. And you know the drill, this is going to be coming from dependency service, and dependency service has a get method. And of course, we will have to make this iContact type. And having the contacts, I have access to the hello contact and to the byContact method. So let me just go ahead and take and test with the hello contact, and let me just get the variable hello ready. And what I will do with this string is actually just change the text of the label that is created here by default. So in the XAML file, we see this label that just says welcome to Xamarin Forms. I only want to change its text, so I will set it a name, and all I have to do is to that label change its text to now be this hello variable. So now let me go ahead and test this out. So of course, currently this is only going to work on Android because we don't have this interface implemented on iOS, but that is what we're testing out here. So let me just run this on the Android simulator. And as soon as the application runs, we should see that the text is no longer that welcome to Xamarin Forms, but that greeting. So we can see here the greeting being displayed. But the interesting thing here is that this code that creates this greeting from the hello contact is actually coded in Java over on another library. So hopefully you find this useful. Either you have an AAR file that you want to reuse on your Android project, you already know how to do it, or you even have your own library over on Android Studio. You have now learned how is it that you will be able to reuse this code, this Java code, over on your Android project. Basically, you have to create a bindings library project, import that AAR file, make that into a DLL file, have it inside of your Android project, and from here everything is simple. We are just creating an interface, creating the implementation over on Android. This is a dependency injection over to the .NET Standard library, and right here we see how this is going to work. Of course, something very similar is going to happen for iOS, but that is something for the next section. During this section, let's continue to focus on Android, starting in the next lecture, taking a look at something important, something that you should know that will help you understand a little bit better how is it that you can change the eventual size of your APKs, which is greatly important, especially if you want your application to run on devices that don't necessarily have a lot of memory. So, in the next lecture, we're going to continue configuring an Android project.